you to Pathway's version of Family Feud. We're actually not going to have families, so there won't be any feuding. But I have I've conducted a survey of this question. Please don't answer it. The question is, what are the most common things that people lose and then find again? And I made a survey of one person, and that's me. And I put them in order, the 5 top ones in order. And I'm going to ask Pastor Jim to stand up if he would. And he's going to randomly point to people. And when he points at you, you have to give your guess. So the first person he points to, see if you can figure out what is the number one thing that people often lose, but then usually at some point find again. Okay. That is in fact on the list, but it's not number one. Good job. Okay. Glasses. That is on the list, but it is not number one. Keys. Ding, 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 ding. That's number one. Okay, number 2. What was the question? It's the people in the back row. They're talking, they're on their phones, they're on their iPads. You think, you guys in the back row don't think I see you, but I don't see the people in the front row because I'm looking like this. So if you want to goof around, front rows, I don't have to make you come up forward, do I, Nikki? All right, question was, what is the number 2? Oh, okay, my bad. Overcomplicate. Okay, anyway, it's the same question, number 2. ID. What's an ID? I must have lost mine. Driver's license? Billfold. Ding, 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 ding. Billfold or purse. We'll give that to you. Okay, number 3. Cell phone is number 3. Ding, 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 ding. By the way, I don't know if all phones have this, but my phone has this app that's on my iPad, and it's Find Your Phone. Do you know about that one? That is so cool. If you don't have an iPad, then it's not working. But anyway, you can click on this thing, and if your phone has juice and it's connected to something, it will tell you, it will show GPS, it will show you where it is. And then you can push this button that says ding-a-ling-a-ling or ring it or whatever. So I use that all the time. I just go there. I suppose you can buy those little things you can put on anything and then it can find it. I think, I should put that on everything. Just sermon notes would be one good idea. Okay, so number 4 was reading glasses and number 5 was sermon notes. Good job. Smart Alec. Okay. Thank you, Jim. Young people. All right, we lose things and then we find things. There's a whole chapter on this in the book of Luke. There's 3 stories. Someone lost a sheep, and then someone lost a coin, someone lost a son, and in these stories, each one of these things was found, and when these things were found, they had a big party, a celebration. When you lose things, it's devastating, it's panic, but then when you find it, there's that moment of joy. And of course, phones and all these things are not a big deal. By the way, as I look on this, I have never permanently lost my keys. I've never permanently lost my billfold. I've never permanently lost my phone. Reading glasses, I'm not sure about. Reading glasses, and socks. I think, you know, those things, I guess there's something you can put on something and then it'll connect to your phone. It will keep track of where things are. I think we need to put this on some socks. Really, I think if we just put one of those on a sock and then the sock gets lost, and then we will finally know where all these socks go. There's like billions of socks somewhere, and if we don't tell the socks our plan, I think, you know, I think someone should make an animated story about this, and we should figure this out. Anyway, you know, these little things that we lose and then we find again are no big deal, but we lose other things in life too. Sometimes we lose our marriages and then we find them again, or we lose a son or a daughter to you know, a godly walk, and then sometimes when they come back, there's great celebration. Or you lose a job and then you find another one. Or sometimes we lose friends and things happen. Somebody says something, someone doesn't say something. And so we have all these things in our lives that are way more important than car keys and phones that we lose and then sometimes hopefully find again. And there's, of course, some things that we lose and we never find again. And I wanted to start this way because our story in some ways is about things that are lost and then things that are found. And we'll come back to that. So we're in this series on Genesis. We're on chapter 41. We started in the beginning of the year with chapter 1, and we're already to chapter 41. It's what happens till time flies by. We're in the middle of the Joseph story. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to that. Chapter 41, verse 1. When 2 full years had passed. Now, he's talking about the chapter before. Remember, Joseph was in prison. He had risen to become sort of the manager of the prison, and he had no hope of a future. He spent his whole entire youth in slavery and in prison. It says the first chapter where we started reading about Joseph, when he got sold into slavery originally, it says in that chapter that he was 17 years old. And in this chapter, it's going to tell us that he's now 30 years old. So 13 years of his life, his whole youth, young adult period, he's lost into slavery, lost his family. There's no connection to his religion. He lost his freedom. He's been wallowing in this prison, and that's been his entire youth. So for 2 years, we don't know how long he was in prison. Maybe he was in for 10 years. But it's 2 years since he had a little bit of hope. The two officials that worked for the Pharaoh was one of the few people that could sort of rescue him out of this situation. He had some hope that the cupbearer would tell Pharaoh about him and right this injustice. But for 2 years, nothing has happened. For 2 years, he's been waiting for this hope to turn into something. And you got to believe that at some point in that 2 years, he just gave up. And I think it represents all of us. We all have this 2-year period somewhere in our life where we're waiting for something. We have this hope of something. We're stuck into something and we can't get out. And we have this hope that it'll happen. Our prayers every day are for the same thing over and over and over and over again. We're praying with all our might. We read all the passages that say, you know, that God will hear our prayers, that the prayer of a righteous man will be heard. And so we all these things in the Bible suggest that if we keep, you know, badgering the gates of heaven, that God will hear, that he hears our prayers, that he cares about us. But, you know, when you keep doing it every day, after day, after day, after day, after day, and nothing happens, and nothing changes, and it doesn't seem like the sun is ever going to come up, eventually, you know, you gradually stop doing it. At first, you're motivated, but at some point, it's just easier to let go of the whole thing than to have hope into something that never happens. And my guess is somewhere along the line, this is what happened to Joseph too. Just like, what's the point? So after 2 full years had passed, nothing's changed, no hope, no possible parole. Pharaoh had a dream. So something totally out of Joseph's control. He's not controlling anything. And in this dream, Pharaoh, is standing by the Nile. The Nile is really representative of the life force of Egypt. A few years back, my wife and I were on a cruise. It was a glorious cruise. It left from Italy, and then it went to Egypt, and then over to Israel, and then over to Turkey. Anyway, it went to all these different places. But when the boat came to Alexandria, Egypt, the boat was going to stay overnight. So there were some options that people had, and the cruise offered different deals. You could take a bus down to Cairo, 3 hours away, and get a hotel, and they take you to the museum and the pyramids and all of that. And it was $800 a person. And being of Dutch ancestry, there's no way we're going to do that. So we got off the boat, and we walked about a half a mile or a mile to a train station. And when we got to the train station, no one spoke English. So it was like, train. So they sent us over to a window, and we got a ticket, 3-hour train ride from there, Alexandria, to Cairo. It was $7 each. So we got on the train, and basically that train followed the Nile. It would be close to the Nile, then it would go away from the Nile, and to come back to the Nile, and it'd be going away. And every time the train was close to the Nile, everything was green, and people were farming and what have you. And whenever it went away from the Nile, it was nothing but desert. I mean, it was just dust. So the Nile for Egypt is everything. It's not only symbolic of the life force of Egypt, it is actually the life force of Egypt. So he is standing by the life source of Egypt. When out of the river came 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Yeah, I would wake up too. I mean, I don't know how the cows ate the other cows. The best way to picture this is they just swallowed them whole. But if they, chewed off little bits at a time, that would be I'd wake up from that one too. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy heads, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. Yeah, well, of course. So he has these 2 dreams. Verse 8, in the morning his mind was troubled. His mind was troubled. Do you ever have a dream where your mind is troubled? You wake up and, you have this dream and you're in trouble, or you forgot something, or some disaster has happened, and then you wake up and then you're actually relieved. It wasn't reality. It's like, and it actually takes like a minute. Your heart is beating, you're sweating, and you're still kind of worried about it, even though you know it's a dream, and it takes like a minute or two. Yeah, I've had those. Or worse is when your wife has a bad dream, and it's about you, and she wakes up and she punches you. She's still mad at you for what you did. So not only am I responsible for the poor things I do while but I'm responsible for what I do in my wife's dream. Is that fair? Yeah. All the married women are going, yeah, that sounds reasonable. So he has this dream. He's troubled. He can't figure this out. What does it mean? So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Now, my guess is there were people that interpreted it. I mean, it could stand for a lot of things. Man, if I was the magician, I would say, well, Pharaoh, it's really a story about the wealthy people of this country. And, if we don't treat the people on the bottom really well, eventually they're going to rise up and eat us. That's one. I mean, you could think of, I'm sure somebody thought of something, but obviously Pharaoh didn't like any of the interpretation. He just wasn't at rest with anything that they said. Now, as I'm reading this, you have to realize who's first reading this. Okay? This history is being written down by Moses. Moses has just taken all the people out of Egypt. They've been slaves for 400 years or so in Egypt. And they have no future. They have no home. They have no identity. They don't have a history. And they're going to some unknown promised land following some God they hardly know. Okay? So Egypt is the power of the world, and we are the nothing of the world. We're in a desert. We have no idea what we're doing or where we're going. Who are we as a people? And so these people are hearing this history for the first time. And what does it sound like? All the wise and intelligent people of this powerful nation called Egypt couldn't figure this out. But one of our guys could. Okay, so this whole Joseph story is like sort of a black eye to Egypt and sort of a pat on the back. Hey, we are something. We are a people. We are a people to be reckoned with. And who is to blame for that? Who is responsible for that? And we'll find that out from Joseph himself. All right, verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants and imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. He told us our dreams. He interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And the things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. So I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." So he finally tells the story. It was 2 years later. It took him 2 years, and he only told it because Pharaoh had this situation. Remember, when you're working for the Pharaoh, you have to be careful. I mean, he could punish you. So this seems like an opportunity to share this whole story because Pharaoh is in need. So Joseph is wasting away in prison. It doesn't seem like the hope that he had is going to come to fruition. But now some random event happens. Some connection that was made 2 years ago is now going to come back to him. And I think there's a lesson for all of us, that God works in our lives, and he brings people and circumstances in our lives, and it's sort of a random thing. And, notice 2 years before, Joseph did the right thing. He, first of all, recognized the need, and then he brought his skills and abilities that God had given him, he gave credit to God, but he brought those to bear on that situation, and then nothing, it seemed, happened to that. And I think that's how God works. That you experience things in life, you meet people, you do certain things, and God doesn't waste any of the experiences that you have in your life. So they come back at some point. I'll give you just a couple illustrations. 1981-82, my wife and I went to the Philippines. We taught at a seminary and Bible college for a year. My supervisor, oversaw what I did. His name was Dave Stravers. We did some cool things in that year that we were in the Philippines. We didn't have children, so we could follow the students on the weekends to go to wherever they were from, little tiny islands, little barrios. It was a lot of fun. We sponsored songwriting contests. Our students were writing songs in their own dialect. No Christian songs existed in their dialect. So we got all these things, and my supervisor sort of gave me the green light on all the crazy things that we did that year. So I had a good relationship with him. Well, then we came back. We took a church in northern Michigan for 4 years. Then we went off and planted a church in Vancouver for 9 years. And all during those years, I really didn't see him again. But my wife kept writing a newsletter, a Christmas newsletter. Every Christmas, the Elsingers now have a child. Now we have 2. Now we have 3. Now we have 4. Things like that. What happened? What we did? What was cool? What wasn't? So anyway, that letter went out to all our friends and relatives, and one of those letters went to him. We had his address and what have you, and he later came back and worked for the Bible League. He was in charge of the ministry department of the Bible League, in Chicago. And anyway, so he got our newsletter every year. We didn't talk. We didn't do anything. And then 13, 14 years later, my friend and I started a nonprofit, and we moved to Chicago. So that Christmas, my wife wrote the newsletter and so on, but it was postmarked from Chicagoland. And so when he got it, he saw, oh, you're in Chicago now. What are you doing in Chicago? So he called me and said, well, what are you doing in Chicago? And I said, well, we started a ministry, blah, 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 this, that. And he said, well, as the Bible League, we're looking for a whole department in that whole arena that you're talking about. Why don't we talk? So we talked, and they had money, and we didn't. So we said, okay. And so we joined the Bible League, and my whole life changed because of that. If I hadn't joined the Bible League, it's a couple years down the road, we were doing some stuff. We needed a guy, and one of the guys that applied was the son-in-law of Jeannie's, or the father of Jeannie's father, son-in-law, Pastor Jim. And so Pastor Jim Pastor Jim and Jeannie are here because of all this whole thing, because of a letter, because of 14 years before working with someone who was a supervisor, had nothing to do with him afterwards. So things happen in your life, and it's just sort of random. You didn't plan on it. It just sort of happens. And then 14 years later, because of that, this happens. And because of that, that happens. And because of that, this happens. And one thing leads to another. Another story. I told you a couple weeks ago we had this big gala honoring thing for Rich DeVos. He's 90 years old, and I had met him many years before, because when we started our nonprofit in Chicago, before we joined the Bible League, we had no money. So we thought, well, who has money? So we went and found him, and he agreed to help us. We didn't know to what extent. But I remember the first time we visited his house. He doesn't really know us. We don't know him. He doesn't really know exactly what we're doing. We explained a little bit through letters and what have you. So I remember the first time we walked into his house. We walk in, and then he and his wife are going to greet us and welcome us into their home. And then I hear behind him, from the room next door, someone say, "Steve!" And I'm like, who's this? So we come in, and it happens to be a guy that was in a church that while I was a student at Calvin Seminary, I was the youth pastor for 10 hours a week, young adult and youth pastor at their church in Granville, for just 1 year. And I preached a few times and did a few things in their church during that year. So I got to know the people of that church. And this guy was a doctor, he and his wife, and they happened to be good friends of Rich and Helen. They happened to be visiting with them. And so, but because they were there, they were like, well, who are you? Why are you here? What's this all about? And so, and we had all our material in the car. We just left it in the car. But because the visitor wanted to know all this stuff, we spent like the next 2 hours explaining in great detail to someone about the whole thing. So because that random thing, something that happened years before, and how many years later, this is like 15 years later, it like opened that door that might not have opened otherwise. And so, I could go on and on and on and on, how things in life happen, and God can use those things earlier in your life. There's nothing that happens in your life, good or bad, that God isn't like using somehow, that doesn't come back to you. Now, because I preach on Sundays, I have to reflect and think about these things. I have to think about, okay, this happened to Joseph. Did this ever happen to me? And I got to sit down and think about this stuff. And I've had the honor or privilege of doing that for the last 40 years, right? Because this is my job. Every week I got to think about all these things. And you don't, right? It's like no one ever asks you. You never have to actually sit down and do it because you have nowhere to go with it. So maybe you just haven't thought about it. So I want to challenge you to think about it in your own life. In fact, the way to think about it is, how did you get to where you are right now? Last week we did this block thing. If you stayed here, was it last week or the week before? Week before. We did this block thing, and one of the exercises was, how did you get to the house that you got? Even the story of houses and how you got there is generally a God thing. How did you get the job that you have? How did you get the spouse that you have? How did you get the kids that you have? How did you end up at this church? Every one of these stories is kind of a God thing. It has a long history of God doing this and God doing that and somehow bringing it together. Everything in your life that God is using to make something happen, and nothing is wasted, even the bad and the negative things. All right, verse 14. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Now, maybe you've wondered what kind of prison this is. It must not have been that good. He had to shave, change his clothes. Comes before Pharaoh. Verse 15. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Okay, he's finally out of the dungeon, finally has some new clothes on, is shaved, there might be some hope in his life. And Pharaoh says, I've heard that you can do this. And, what would you say? Even if you couldn't do it. Yeah, of course. Yes, I can do that. When you apply for a job and your future potential job boss asks you, can you do something? What do you say? Yes, I can do that, even if you have no clue about what he's talking about. Because you can learn, right? But the first thing he says is, I cannot do it. And you wonder if he paused a bit. I cannot do it. Pharaoh's like, yeah, hold it. Where's that baker or that cupbearer? He's going to lose his head too, right? The cupbearer must have gone, okay, this isn't going to be good. But the first thing he says is, I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer that he desires. I cannot do it. At some point, we all need to say that. I cannot, whatever you're struggling with, I don't know what you're struggling with. It could be, losing weight. The first step is to say, I cannot do it. That's the first step of AA. I cannot do it. I cannot do it. If I could do it, I would have done it. There are things you want to change about your life. You really want those things changed. You don't like how you're stuck into this. So if you could change it, you would. Of course you would. It's what you want. But you don't. And you don't because you can't. And nothing is going to change until you say, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. I can't change this situation. I can't change as a husband. I can't change as a wife. I can't change our family dynamics. I can't get out of my funk. I can't get undepressed. I'm depressed, and I can't undo it. If I could, why would I stay this way? So the first step is to admit, I cannot do it. And then the second step is to acknowledge one who can. I need help. That's what Joseph, in a sense, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer that he desires. I cannot do it. Now notice, again, I've mentioned this many times. Every time Joseph is praised for anything, anytime he does something good, he always brings God into the situation. Here he is again. We're going to see it over and over and over again. And I've mentioned it every time that, we need to be more, that people saw God in Joseph's life, and it's because Joseph kept saying things about him. And people will not see God in our life unless we say some things. And I've said this over and over again the last 3 weeks, but I haven't given you a concrete way to do it. So maybe you've heard these things and you still haven't done it in your life. Last week, how many times did you mention God? So let me give you some practical ways of thinking about this. How and when do you mention God in a conversation? Here's some suggestions. Anytime anyone compliments you. Hey, good job. Well, God is the one who gave me the ability to do that. Anytime anyone says anything good to you about anything that you've done, there's your chance to acknowledge God. Or anytime someone says thanks. Hey, thank you for doing that. Well, God is the one that gave me this kind of heart and so on. And, you just give praise to God. So anytime someone compliments you, anytime someone gives thanks concerning anything that you've done, or how about when any good thing happens? When a good thing happens, you just say, well, the God I serve, makes these good things happen. I just had this yesterday. A couple days ago, I was on the way home from something, and I stopped off at where I generally play pickleball. And there were some people playing. It was kind of drizzling. There was only 4 people playing. So I just said hi. And then this person said, hey, are you playing in the tournament on Saturday? I said, yes. Someone left their paddle here, so they gave it to me. So I took this random paddle, put it in my car. And then yesterday when I went to the tournament, it was just in my car. I didn't know whose it was or what to do with it. And anyway, so it was time for the tournament to begin, and my partner didn't show up. I'm like waiting for him. Now it's time to play, and my partner isn't there. So I went to the guy in charge of it, and I said, well, I don't know where my partner is. So there was some guy, John. He said, well, here's John. John isn't really in the tournament, but why don't you just take him? So John, I'd seen him before, didn't really know him. Okay, John, you're my partner. And we're just warming up a little bit, just 5 minutes before we play and hitting the ball. And he put a few into the net, and he was like, he's kind of frustrated. Finally, he said, yeah, this isn't my real paddle. I lost my paddle the other day. And I said, oh, really? What color? Did it have a white? Yeah, it had a white thing. Oh, I have it in my car. So I went and got it. And I said, isn't that weird? Then I said, that's how God is. That's how God is. Now, I hadn't got, a lot of people know that I'm a pastor there and so on, but I'd never really talked to him. So I said, that's how God is. God does weird things to make things happen. I don't know. It happens all the time. So good things happen. Give God the credit. Someone compliments you. Give God the credit. Someone gives you thanks. Give God the credit. In fact, give God the credit. Actually, anytime something bad happens, it's like, let's say something bad happens. It's like, well, I've had a lot of bad things happen in my life, and ultimately God has always turned them around to something good. So let's hang on in faith. Or when someone challenges you into something, and you're like, boy, I don't know if I can do it. But maybe with God's help, I can. See, it's almost any time anyone opens their mouth about almost anything, you can turn around and talk about God. All right, verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, and then he tells the whole story verbatim, and then he tells the second dream, verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. Did I forget to mention God? Let me mention it again. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that come afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. There are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God, did I mention God? God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. The 7 years of famine are to follow. Then all the abundance of Egypt will be forgotten. It's interesting how when you have grief, you forget all the good things that happened in the past. The famine will ravage the land. The abundance of the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. Okay, did I mention God? Okay. So then what happens? Now, so Joseph has interpreted the dream, but now Joseph steps out. Okay, he this is his chance. So he steps out. He takes a chance. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land, take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt so that the country may not be ruined by famine. You need a guy. And let me tell you what the guy should do. So he's selling. This is his chance. And sometimes you need to do that too. Verse 37, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked him, can we find anyone like this man, in whom the Spirit of is the Spirit of God? Notice he kept mentioning God, 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 God. Finally, it's like he had to mention it 7 times. Finally, people get it. Yeah, you have the Spirit of God. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Now, we all know people like this. People that have disaster happen in their life, and somehow they always come out smelling like a rose. They have these things just drop into their laps. They have these incredible jobs just all of a sudden land right in their lap. Or they get this great family, or, and you look at your life and it's like, how come stuff like this doesn't happen to me? It happens to other people, but not me. So here's Joseph. He's wallowing away in prison. He interprets a couple dreams, and voila, he becomes the second most important leader in all of Egypt. I mean, how could this be? Number one, it's God's plan for your life. It's not your plan for your life. For the last 13 years of his life, from age 17 to 30, he's just been wallowing with no hope whatsoever. But what has he been doing? Has he just been wasting his time for all these years, 13 years? He's been actually working on this job that he just got. Right? He comes to Potiphar's house, and what does he do? He's nothing. He's just a slave. He's the last slave that just got hired. And what does he do? He works hard. He organizes things. He does such a good job that he gets, promoted through the ranks. Then he gets sent to prison on a false charge. Now he's in Nowheresville again. He has to start all over. He is nothing. And what does he do? He works hard. He organizes things, and the jailer puts him to the high. He's been practicing for the last 13 years, this exact job, organizing and managing stuff. So God wants to use you, but sometimes you go through stuff. You make the best of what you have in front of you. God, in some ways, is preparing you for something. And if you're just sitting around waiting for God, please just drop something in my lap, well, God is waiting for you. Do something with the thing that you already have in your lap. Verse 41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck, and he had him ride in his escalade with a leather interior and the spoke wheels. Second command, the people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt. Who's hearing this for the first time? These people who have just left Egypt. See, that's who we are as the people of God. We are this people. This people that Egypt was bowing down to. That's who we are. It may seem like we're slaves. It may seem like we're nobody and nothing on the way to who knows what. But this is who we are. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Okay, so Joseph has been away for 13 years, his whole youth. That's when a person is most influenced by the culture around them. It's ages 17 to 30. That's an influential time. That's when you try to figure out what you believe, what you think about life. And he's doing this apart from his family. And it's interesting. Let's just keep reading. I'll show this to you. Verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years' abundance, the land produced plentiful. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt. He stored it in the cities, In each city, he put food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the seas. So it was so much, he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph of Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." So he marries this priestess daughter. So this priest guy is obviously not following his God. So he's sort of married into a family that's promoting a religion different. So I'm wondering what's happening to Joseph. What is, after 13 years of living here, is Joseph just sort of believing in a random God, kind of a God, well, you have God, we have God, we're all just following God? Is he sort of losing his faith? It seems like he gave up on his family. The name of his son. It is because God made me forget all my trouble and my father's household. And the thing that I always wondered about reading this story, once Joseph became in charge, second in command and all of that, why didn't he go check out where his father and so on, all the brothers and his family? He could have checked it out. He could have gone there, or if he couldn't go there, he could have sent somebody. He's in charge of all kinds of stuff. Hey, you 2 guys, I want you to go over there. I want you to find these people, report back to me what's going on. But he doesn't. In those 7 years of abundance, he could have done this, and he doesn't do it. So I wonder if he finally gave up on the whole family thing, and now he has this generic view of God. I don't know. He named his second son Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, people cried to Pharaoh for food, and Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. And so we have this little phrase that sort of leads us into the next part of the story. So I started this whole sermon with a lost and found kind of scenario. Joseph, because of a dream, and he told his brothers about the dream, he lost his family connection. He lost his freedom, and he got sold into slavery. That was because of the first dream. Then he gets to Egypt. He works for Pharaoh, and he gets falsely accused, ends up in prison. And there's the second couple of dreams. So there's 2 dreams that Joseph had himself, and then there's 2 dreams that are reported to him by the people working for Pharaoh. And that had some hope, but it didn't work out. And then finally, there's the 2 dreams of Pharaoh. And through those 2 dreams of Pharaoh, Joseph, in a way, gets something restored. He lost his freedom. He lost his ability to have stuff. And he sort of gets those things back. So he lost something in the first dream, and he's gaining some of it back in this third dream. But he hasn't really gained everything back, has he? The story continues. He hasn't gained his family back. And maybe he's lost a little bit of his faith. We don't know. He's holding on to his integrity, but I'm not sure about his faith in the same God that he was raised with. So the bigger question, I guess, that I have after reading all of this is, well, why does God have us go through these things? Why do we lose our keys in the first place? Is that part of God's plan? Today I'm going to have you lose your keys. So what good is that? Now, you might say, well, it's to teach you to take care of your keys better. Well, if that were true, then I would do that. So in 40, 50, 60 years, I haven't still learned how to do that. So what's the point, God? Obviously, I cannot be taught this lesson, so why do you keep trying, right? And the billfold and all these, the phone thing. Then Apple came along and gave me an app that I don't even have to worry about it. I don't even bother. I just have to make sure it's charged. If it's charged, that if I lose it somewhere else and I don't know where it is, I can click the button, and when that person turns it on, it's going to say, please call Steve. Here's his number. This is his phone. Don't even think about stealing it. You know, it's unbelievable. So what's the point of all this stuff? And then when we lose, sons and daughters, we raise them in the church, then one walks away from the whole thing. What's the point of all this? What's the point of having good friends and then losing one over some crazy thing? Or you're working hard for a company and then they give you a pink slip and here you are struggling, trying to figure out what to do. Or you have your health and then you have this health problem and it comes and it's like, oh, what's all this about? What's this about? Would you like to know? Well, then you have to keep coming here to Pathway because that part is still coming. The story, this is the story, but we're just partway through the story. There's the grand story of the book of Joseph, and I think the grand story answers that exact question. But that's what we struggle with, right? We struggle with this whole thing of, bad things happen, but what's the point of them? Why does God allow us to go through some of the things that we go through? Is there a point? Or is it just the generic, there's sin in the world, and, we got to suffer because there's sin in the world? Or is he trying to do something? Is that, how does it get used in our life? So please come back next week, and maybe we'll find out. Let's pray together. Lord, these stories of things that happened so long ago, it's hard for us sometimes to get a hold. And really, we don't have any words from your word about how Joseph may have felt after a year, after he had some hope and nothing happens. We don't know what it was like day after day after day after day, trying to be faithful and do the right thing, and yet there's nothing but suffering. There's no reward. There's no good thing happening out of all of this. And we can relate to that sometimes too. We have the things that are happening in our lives and we can't connect the dots. And we can see the purpose. We can endure the pain a little easier, but sometimes we can't see the purpose. What's the point? So we ask for your Spirit to comfort us in the things that we struggle with. We ask that you give us the patience and the courage and the strength to hang in there through your plan. Your plan is better than our plan. If it was up to us, we'd make a mess of everything. So help us to trust. Help us to trust your plan for our lives. Help us to be faithful in what you're calling us to do in the moment, whether we can see the positive thing as a result or not. And then prepare us and show us the way to your plan for our lives. Nothing in our lives happens, is wasted. Everything that we experience, the good and the bad, is used for your plan. Help us to believe that and help us to go forward with that. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. This time we're going to have our offering, giving back to the Lord, just a portion of what he's given to us. And let's sing our closing song as we do that. And stand. So we'll do all three things. We will stand, do the offering, and sing all at one time. And what song are we doing?
Proverbs 3, 5
Trust in
through
the Lord.
8.
Perfect.
The Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding.
God's parting word of blessing. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with all of you.